Horizon Chance, Home Reaction. This is Kerch crossing destroyed. Ukraine breaks Russian in. Okay. So one place where I'm pretty sure this is like in southern Ukraine or something. So one place I thought like, oh, whoa, wait a minute. Russia is playing a gamble now. Ukraine's gamble itself didn't play out because now, Russia is like ramping up things in southern Ukraine around Donbass and things. Apparently not. Ukraine even like wins there as well. What is happening? What the what the fuck is happening? Look, man. Again, I have to say this. Apparently, I say that in every video. I don't support Russia or I don't support Ukraine. I don't support anyone. What does that mean to be supporting anything? I support no wars, right? Russia is clearly the one who's the aggressor here because they are the one who started the war, special military operation. Even Putin calls it a war now. So, the response like this is common sense. Like, Ukraine can do this in the first place is surprising. On top of that, Russia can't even fight back now. This is like if USA suddenly turns out to be not powerful and something like, I don't know which other country. Let's say India and USA fights and somehow India is kicking USA's ass. How does that happen? Is there even a fair comparison? How powerful was Ukraine before all this war even started, right? Because India is like, what, fourth or fifth military in the power, right? Like after China, Russia, USA. So I don't think even that's fair comparison, right? So nobody saw this coming. So I don't know what's happening. I don't know if there's any game plan or not. But this was the channel, the Enforcer, as you can see in the, phone. Yeah, and in past few days, I've been so busy. I haven't even finished like a Federation video yet, which I will do today. Even if I skip sleep or something, I have to do that. But yeah, I sometimes have a hard time finding time. So yeah, I'm doing this. I bought an expensive phone, so might as well utilize it. So let's watch one.
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and welcome to the breaking news. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and support us on Patreon, link in the description below. Today's breaking news is that in the area of the Kerch Strait, the final and last railroad ferry to be operating across the entirety of the area has been destroyed in a major oil fire, leaving the Kerch Bridge to be the only remaining logistical route that can be used crossing from the mainland of Russia and into the Crimean Peninsula. This is a major development. This is probably one of the largest developments that we've seen so far in the Kerch Strait over the entirety of the war, as a while ago, 3 out of the 4 railway.
So not even in the South Ukraine. It's like in Crimea, which is like kind of that, right? I'm pretty sure Putin wants Donbass and places like that so he can solidify Crimea as his own. So there is no doubt because apparently he needs that Crimean port or something, right? It's like an old Soviet port. I'm pretty sure something like that, right? But look at that, Ukraine is like even attacking that place. Like I'm not gonna let this go either, right?
Ferries that were being used to cross the Kerch Strait have been knocked out simultaneously by Abrams missiles that have been fired into the area, hitting their 3 targets successfully and leaving a singular railroad ferry to carry on the struggle of providing a logistical connection for the mainland of Russia to the rest of the Crimean Peninsula. And that connection ended today. Here is the ferry that was in the harbor of Kharkiv before the attack. We can actually see right here that it is laden with oil-filled railway cars. Cars carrying fuel vital to the operation of the Russian Ministry of Defense, and not only that, the civilians living within the Crimean Peninsula. We hear a little cough right there. And they're really going to be coughing here in a second because we're going to be moving on from that little clip and we're going to be moving on to what happened just a little while after that clip was taken. The ferry was hit. We don't know by what exactly, but we can see the ferry right over there, and it is insanely on fire. This is actually the Conroe Trader. From what we understand, it was the only ferry left that had not been stricken, damaged, or sank at its mooring during the Abrams missile attacks of a while ago. It's the only one that's been able to transport fuel and other kinds of vital supplies and equipment from inside of the Russian mainland into the Kerch Strait. Everything else has had to be relocated
that is engulfed.
either to the
Look at that
bridge inside of Ukraine itself within the occupied territories, or it had to be moved over the Kerch Bridge, and specifically the railway segment of that bridge. This ship was burning horrifically, and from what we can tell, the fires have burned so heavily that the hull has buckled within the area where the fire started, and the ship is now sinking quite rapidly. But you can see that the fire is already reaching the water line. It looks as though there may be some breaches in the hull in these areas as the temperature of the fire has started to warp the steel that the vessel is made out of. And it seems as though things are not going to be going all too well, at least within this area, for the Russians logistically going on forward. We were also able to see the fire from the other side of the Kerch Strait. You can actually see right here, this is from the city of Kerch on the highway leading to the Kerch Bridge. We can see the fire and its smoke spanning way off into the horizon, pretty much covering half the sky out there in the distance. We then also got to see from a local beach within the city of Kerch the fire as it's seen from the other side of the strait.
That is insane level of fire. It's like, what is it, volcano? No, it's what the fuck? Look at that. How does it burn that bad? I mean, what was on it, that making it burn this bad? I mean, this like all the way, look at that, it's like a volcano or something. No, this is like insane level of fire. Same fire the Moscow had apparently recently in one of those factory. But yeah, there you go.
Once again, a pretty large and pretty horrific fire. It's not really the fire that's the important thing, however. It's really the damage that will be posed to the Russian logistic structures within this area of the strait. Now, one thing that's actually interesting, and we've covered this a while ago, is that the Kerch Bridge actually did not have a lot of strategic value throughout most of the war, because interestingly enough, a lot of the Russian military's logistics are conducted by rail, and while the Kerch Bridge is a rail and road bridge, it appears that the Russian army had decided that the ferries were a much more viable option, considering that instead of it being a stationary target that could easily be hit and knocked out like the Kerch Railway Bridge, this was more of a transient target moving from place to place. The ferries couldn't be hit that easily, at least that's what the Russian army believed, and for that reason, it was a lot safer of a long-term option to pick. However, that didn't end up being the case. It's quite clear that the 3 out of the 4 railway ferries that ended up getting hit and sank at their moorings a few months ago were, of course, viable targets for the Ukrainian armed forces, and that this logistics corridor is as weak and vulnerable as the Kerch Bridge itself at certain instances and certain times of day. But nevertheless, the Russians have still tried to eke out any last amounts of efficiency left with the Conroe trader to try and keep everything moving across the strait as best as they possibly can. And then today, the Conroe trader was hit, caught on fire, and sank at its mooring inside of Kavkaz. We actually know exactly where the Conroe trader would have been in this port. There's only one railroad ferry mooring, which is right here. This is not the Conroe trader that's pictured here in this in the satellite picture, but nevertheless, this is exactly where it would have been moored, either right here or over on the other side. It has been completely knocked out. There's no question about it. This ship is most likely...
Yeah, I think Russians are like really underestimating what kind of technology Ukraine is getting from US and places like that. This confirms in my head that US and Western technology is like insanely ahead compared to everybody else. Because this level of surgical attack that even Russians like, this probably not going to happen, happens every time. Every time everybody's surprised, including the Russians. Clearly is like American or like Western technology, mostly American. This is insanity.
In fact, the fire damage may be so severe that it would take months, if not over a year, to really try and recover this vessel and make it operational once more. But, of course, it is a very, very big thing, a massive victory for Ukraine, because now the Russians are faced with a singular option. Either they can move their supplies within artillery distance of the land corridor, or in the artillery distance of Ukraine in the land corridor, or they can start using the Kerch Bridge exclusively. If they use the Kerch Bridge exclusively, the Ukrainians are going to hit and destroy this bridge really soon, and the Russians probably understand that. This means that the Russians are going to have to go with the very unfavorable option of moving all of their supplies that are required for Kherson and Crimea over the land bridge supply route, which means that most of it will be within artillery distance, and this will greatly reduce the supply efficiency of Kherson and Crimea and the amount of supplies that they are able to draw on at any given moment of time. But moving on from that giant piece of news.
Yeah, logistics are like suffocating Russians, right? Slowly and surely, Ukrainians are doing this kind of surgical attacks, and like it is really suffocating all these things, right? Like there will be a time where Russians really have to think about like what are we gonna do? Like everything's closing down. What the hell are we going to do, right?
to happen today. Really a massive victory for Ukraine logistically. It appears that fuel resources in the Kerch Strait are not the only thing that is in jeopardy, as we have seen that the fires are continuing in Prolatarsk and are consuming even more fuel tanks as time goes by. We can actually see right here the fire as it continues to move closer and closer towards the western side of the facility and gets dangerously close to the kerosene tanks that are currently here. From what we understand, almost all of the oil and fuel tanks at this facility have been completely destroyed in the never-ending explosions that continue to happen as each tank heats up and eventually combusts in a violent explosion, leading to the chain reaction to continue on across the entirety of the facility from the east, where it began, all the way to the western side, which is what we're starting to see here at the end of this clip. It does seem as though the Ukrainians are conducting a really good anti-resource campaign against the Russians, and especially against usable fuel resources. It appears that those seem to be top priority for the Ukrainians, and they are trying to knock out as many and as much of them as they possibly can, not only within the Kerch Strait and also knocking out a railroad ferry there, but also knocking out the oil depot at Prolatarsk as well. We also got to hear huge news today, this is actually massive, that the Ukrainians have completely cut off the Russians south of Reka Seim, as the Ukrainians were able to take the town of Krasnoyarsk, which is right along the Reka Seim River, just today. This statement did come from Oleksandr Syrsky. It was a statement made to President Zelensky directly. Sadly, we don't have a translation for this clip, but I will show a little bit of it to y'all. Oleksandr Syrsky did state and confirm that they had been able to take this village today, meaning that the Russian communication line has been severed with the Russian defense forces south of the river and the Russian defense forces that are around the area of Koronivo at the moment. This is a major development because this means that either the Russians will have to completely rely on the pontoon bridge crossings in the area, or they will have to find some other form of a viable way to keep those forces running on the southern side of the river, although that's highly unlikely at this point, and we are expecting that there will be really no way to sustain the brigade-strength unit that is on the south of the Reka Seim, meaning that Ukraine has largely assured a strategic victory at this moment within the region. Moving on from that little bit of news, sadly we don't have
It feels like Russia's playing numbers game while like Ukrainians are playing some kind of a chess, like checkmate all the time. Like you might have numbers, like what you're gonna do with that numbers if you don't have any way of doing anything type of shit, right? So this is just point blank insane. The left and right, they're basically doing this, right? Like cutting off supplies and access and all that thing, right? I don't know where this is going, I'm not gonna lie, right? Sooner or later, Russia will be forced to come to some kind of a peace agreement if they feel like they're losing left and right, at least losing access to things, right?
Translation once again, but we were able to hear some other major news coming from inside of Kharkiv, as the 3rd Brigade has announced a major offensive that has begun within the area. We can actually see the Telegram post right here stating that they will be conducting an offensive operation within the Kharkiv Oblast, which is fairly new. We don't actually know where this offensive has begun at the moment. There are 2 possible places, either near Drovchina over here in the eastern area of the Oblast, or within the north around Vovchansk. Either offensive would be achieving a pretty decent goal of reclaiming territory and once again bringing the entirety of Kharkiv under Ukrainian control, but we don't really know exactly where this offensive has started at the moment and where it's going to end up going. But still, a very big piece of news to hear, and we'll be waiting to see how this develops. Moving on from that, we also got to hear that inside of the Russian Federation, not that far away from Volgograd, another hero city a lot like Kursk, because Volgograd was once the infamous city of Stalingrad, where the deadliest battle in human history unfolded. But right outside of that, and in the area of Oktyabrysky, or really Marinovka, which is the airfield that this village is named after, we were able to see that the airbase here that was attacked last night, that we covered live on air when it was happening, appears to have sustained wildly serious damage. Many of y'all will know, before we even get into this, to explain something that's a little special about this airfield, that they had actually started to install what they call light shelters in this area, which are these little aluminum sheds that they put the aircraft inside of to try and protect them from any kind of serious damage that could be caused by an incoming attack. It's not at all like a hardened shelter. These are incredibly soft armor and are possibly meant to protect against high explosive munitions of a very small variety, because beyond that, there's not really a lot of use for these things. But nevertheless, we did get to see satellite image showing the aftermath of the strike, and it was unbelievably serious. Take a look at this. From the satellite footage, we can see that largely the entire eastern side of the airfield and the western side have been burned to a cinder. The entire area is called...
Okay, what is Twitter? I'm seriously confused all the time. What is X? As far as I knew, X doesn't have that much base, like that many people on it compared to anything else like Facebook, YouTube, TikTok and shit like that. And yet Twitter is like a thing where everybody goes to, apparently all the expert and things. People post satellite images like that, military talk happens, official talk happens. What is Twitter? Seriously, that's what I'm asking. Because it is very small base compared to everybody else, and yet it's treated as this important social media place where everybody just do their thing. Important officials, important people just tweet there apparently. Why is it so important?
On fire. It appears that we can also see now the roads that were made for the surface-to-air missile systems that were in this area as well. But getting a closer look at the hardened shelters within this direction, we can see several of them were blown up in a massive explosion. We're not exactly sure what hit this area, but it was a massive explosion. It appears that a large amount of the aircraft were destroyed within these hardened shelters. And not only that, the supply area back here was also hit and burned to a cinder as well, showing that serious damage was caused. And not only that, we can see this massive gash in this hardened shelter over here as well, showing that the aircraft inside may have also been heavily damaged, if not destroyed, in the explosion that occurred last night. We were also able to see even more closer up pictures of this area and the serious damage that was caused, but this is confirming in large detail that this airfield hit was one of the most severe ones that we've seen so far in recent war history. We were also able to see a little bit more information about the attack on the airbase. Once again, a close-up picture of the hit, and showing that the damage was wildly severe, at least at the moment. This is opening up Marinovka for further attacks by Ukrainian drone.
Okay, I don't know if this is normal, I'm just like learning it now, but Ukrainians are like doing surgical attacks everywhere they can think of. There is probably one grand plan or grand strategy that at play here, which means that they have like a larger end goal in mind, or larger goals that they need to pass or something. I guess they basically came up with this like, like last few months or something. There's some kind of like a Five Eyes or US intelligence is involved, because US soldiers were like training Ukrainians, right, for F-16s, obviously, certain other things. So it doesn't feel far-fetched that like someone like Europeans or Americans or like intelligence agencies or like some experienced generals basically brief Ukrainians how to conduct things, how to do battle plan, because that would be a really key thing to do. And I guess that's what has happened, because it feels like this is really surgical compared to everything else that has happened in the past. They're really thinking what to do, where to do, how to do it. There's a grander plan, I think.
Forces, as the Ukrainians have made it quite clear now that there is not a viable Russian air defense system within this area, and this means that the entire fighter wing, or really fighter bomber brigade that is here at the moment, may be within jeopardy of being attacked and hit even further. We do know that there's a decent amount of other targets that could be hit within this airfield. For example, beyond this area that has been completely obliterated, they could try and go for the tarmac down here further south. They could also go for the new ammunition storage that appears to be constructed, at least in satellite footage here at this part of the airbase, and they could also try and go for the repair paddock that is also a little bit further off to the west down here that we're looking at on satellite picture. Nevertheless, it does seem as though the Ukrainians' drone campaign is ending up being wildly successful still. The Russians haven't found a good way to really counter Ukrainian drones, at least over the vast lands that Russia covers, and it does appear that the damage like this will continue in serious form well on into the future. A major success to be claimed for Ukraine, and once again making sure to limit the Russian combat air capabilities in the war, either inside the Kursk Oblast or within occupied Ukraine as a whole. But with that, that is all of the breaking news that we have today. I've got to thank each...
Yeah, you know what? There's a saying, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones at others, because if others throws at you, your glass house is gonna break. Russia has a vast land that they can't defend. How the fuck are they going to defend, right, with their population? They can only defend key places like Moscow and things, but they can't just defend entire geography they have now, which is what the problem is today, right? Ukrainians can do all these surgical attacks, and how are Russians going to defend against that? Russians can just defend every part of their land that they have there, And like I guess they never thought of it. They never thought that Ukraine's going to be this level of surgical. They probably didn't thought that America and Europe is going to support Ukraine at this level. They probably thought this is just going to be Crimea 2.0. That happened in 2012. It's just going to be version of that. It's like, which I feel is weird. Like, you can't just attack the whole country, take over half of the country, and like nobody's going to do anything. That was never going to happen. So I don't know what that was, but that is what we're seeing today, right? It's nearly impossible to defend entire Russian land because there's not many there people, and even if there were, the land is way too big. And so this kind of surgical attack is like, it's gonna happen. How are you gonna defend against it, right? So I don't know what's gonna happen, but yeah, this is insane. Everything that we've been seeing so far is just completely insane. Like, surgical, I feel like America is involved here, like American intelligence, like Five Eyes at least, Western intelligence, NATO intelligence, all these people are involved. Experienced generals and people like that are involved, like how to conduct what, because Ukraine basically doing here like some kind of like an experienced military who's been doing this kind of a war thing, for years. They are fighting. That's how it feels, right? Because the way they are going about it, right, feels like like some experienced thing is behind it. So America must be behind it. That's what I'm thinking. I could be wrong. Ukraine might just figure shit out slowly. I guess when you're back against the wall, you figure things out. Maybe it's that, but I don't know. So yeah, I don't know where this is going. If Ukraine keeps attacking Russia in key places and like pushes Russia's back against the wall, would Russia revert to like nukes or something? I don't know. Ukraine is basically now or never type of situation, so they can't back down. Whatever happens type of way. Russia, who knows what Russia is going to do? If Russia realizes, wait a minute, our access to Crimea is done, our access to this place is done. Even with our numbers, we can't do much of anything because all our accesses are cut off. We are looking bad in the global stage. Putin and his like war generals might just decide like, screw it, let's just use nuke or something, which is going to be fucked up. I don't know. Alright, well, if you like my next, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.